This episode of the Critical Careers Podcast is sponsored by CBRE. Hi, I'm Joyce Wady. Welcome to the Critical Careers Podcast. On today's show, I'm thrilled to welcome Catriona Shearer, the Global Head of Data Center Consulting at JLL, and Michelle Wallace, the COO of Digital Infrastructure Ireland and a founder of A Better Work. On today's show, we're talking about driving change in the workplace, how the data center industry can work better, why you don't need to be scared of breaking tradition and trying something new. And we also learn about two amazing programs that Catriona and Michelle are leading that are having a big impact on talent in the workplace. So sit back, enjoy the show. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you to both of you for joining us today. I've asked both of you to be here today just because I think as we were doing the interviews for the book, I had really interesting conversations with each of you individually, and I wanted to kind of bring us together to have a group discussion because I think there's some really interesting synergies and stuff that are worth talking about today. So as I was talking to the women through all the interviews for the book, obviously the thing that kind of came through the most strongly was how supported and how welcome women feel in the digital infrastructure industry. They feel like they're supported by their peers, they're supported by their male colleagues, they're supported by other women in the industry, all of which is just phenomenal and is something that I think as an industry, we do a really bad job of sharing. I don't know how well aware we are of it and how much we actually talk about that. But I think, one of the other things that I heard was that there are war stories that kind of people have had in other industries and in other jobs that they have, where they've run into so much more traditional, sexism or issues or, problems where they haven't felt so welcome. And it just kind of got me thinking, which is great for digital infrastructure because it shows how far we've come and it shows that we've made so much progress. But I also think it kind of made me start to think about, well, what else needs to be done? What else needs to change in our workspace environment and within the industry to really, how do we continue to evolve? How does the industry continue to grow? And as we all know, there's absolutely a talent shortage in the industry. And and so we need to bring in more voices and we need to bring in more perspectives and we need to bring in we have to cast a much wider net as we're recruiting people into the industry. So I kind of wanted to talk with both of you about that today because I think it's an interesting idea and it's an interesting concept. And both of you have different background experiences that, I think would be really great for our listeners to hear. So Michelle, I just kind of starting with you, I know in what you do with the Better Work, you evaluate a lot of workplace trends and you see a lot of, things that are happening in how culturally companies work and companies exist. So are there any trends that you've kind of noticed or that you're paying attention to that, kind of happening at a really high macro level or even within the digital infrastructure industry overall?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Joyce. And actually, do you know what? The very first stat, when I was thinking about this call and, coming on and having a chat to you ladies, I was thinking how critical careers in this project, yes, there's a beautiful book out of it and it's wonderful to be part of it, but I've never met Catriona before. I've met her because of this. I've met lots of other great women because of this. And one of the key things that we've all lost, but particularly women and particularly women trying to get into leadership across all industries is network. And so when we can actually support that network and generate that network, ways of connecting women, right? So it's I think when women are connected, they're great, they're supportive, they're lifting each other up. But actually we have to create that network as well. And that's just want to thank you guys for creating this because that in itself is such a massive step and part of the solution to this. And I think this really affects women, but it's also affecting the next generations, which I think there's a lot of similarities around what works for women and what works for the next generations. So one of the things is that I suppose how we work, how we've designed our work, pretty much it's about 150 odd years old. And, if you think through the generations, a lot of that over time has been with one person in a household working, one person staying at home. It's not designed for, dual income families, if that is the scenario, or caring situations. And so what happens is there is this kind of fear or there's almost this stigma where there's this feeling, well, women are going to leave the workforce at a certain point. And actually, what we need to start doing is saying, okay, why are women leaving the workforce? What is it and how we design work that is making it unwelcome? And lots of people are doing this really well. They're looking at progressive ways of working. And we do see that by changing how we work, we can actually make it a much better, more welcoming place for women and, anybody who just doesn't have the capacity to kind of work in a regular way. And that can be flexibility. It can be 4-day working weeks. It can be, part-time. It can be around how we support. It can have better boundaries. There's lots and lots of ways to do it, lots of solutions. So it's not that they don't exist. We just have to kind of, move past the status quo and think a little bit outside the box. And also, we're recording this podcast online. All of the tools are there to create a much more flexible environment. And yet, we've got to be really careful that we don't lose a lot of the progress that's been made over the last, particularly in the last 5 years since the pandemic, in kind of this flexible, hybrid, remote way of working that really does. And, the evidence shows that it really suits women. So we've got to be able to enhance that and not kind of pull back on it, which is kind of a huge trend that we're seeing now in the market at the moment.
Yeah. So, I mean, what do you like? Are there any things that, companies can do in how they structure their workplace that enable this to happen for a broader workforce? Because I mean, like you said, it is women, but it's not necessarily just women. It can be men who have a, different set of responsibilities. It can be, other underserved communities that are trying to, take a different step into a new career or into a new industry. Are there specific things that companies can do to kind of help set the pillars that start to open up the workplace?
Hiring women and having diversity in an organization is not just a kind of it's not just a nice tick box, right? This creates real results for companies. So I think it was McKinsey who did the Women in the Workforce report in 2024, looked at in the upper quartile in leadership teams where they had the kind of highest percentage of women versus leadership teams where there was no women. They had a 47% increase on return on earnings, which is phenomenal, right? So it's like a no-brainer. So it's a mindset shift that this isn't just a tick box, right? This isn't just a nice to have. Oh, it's nice to have, women at the top, so that whatever, some virtue signaling. No, no, no. There's a valid business reason. That's number one. If we can all kind of look at that and see this as a huge business benefit. The other thing is we need to look at what do women need in the workforce. And it is kind of almost creating a persona because different women need different things, just like different people need different things, different men need different things, right? So we need to look at like, what is it that women need? And when we start to look at things like flexibility, how do we create an environment where we can give more flexibility, create better boundaries? That will help women. So we do see women leaving the workforce after they have children. They're potentially picking up more of that a burden is a terrible word. That's joy. um, but they are picking it up more often, so it's just kind of creating those support mechanisms. So I run a completely remote, and this is my Better Work team, are completely remote, completely flexible. So we have core hours. Everyone is expected to be there in those core hours. And that doesn't mean, Catriona, you can decide when to come to work, and Joyce, you can decide. Well, no, no, no. We're all here this time. This is a non-negotiable. You don't turn up, you don't do your work, you don't do your results, you're out. Like it's not a soft, do what you like type of environment. We've got really strict and strong expectations on people and boundaries. But at the same time, what's going to work for your lifestyle, right? What's going to work for your the things that are outside your work, and then what works also for the business. And what we find is that I have access to a skill set that so many businesses are missing out on because we're looking at a very kind of traditional model of it has to be 9 to 6, Monday to Friday in the office. The third thing is like intentionally designing the culture. What do we stand for? Do we really mean it? Are we really living by it? Why do we do this in the first place? Who are we benefiting? How do we really know our work is worth it? And I think when we start to build that kind of culture consciously, it creates a more inclusive environment for anybody, really.
Sure, sure. So, and it's interesting kind of hearing you break it down into those three different points. And I was just going to say, I was like, Catriona, I wanted to kind of circle, like bring you into the loop here because, you look at things from, I mean, your role is looking at things from an operational perspective and how data centers function. And I may be way oversimplifying that statement there. But, I would love to kind of hear from your perspective on, what are some of those practical elements of if we're going to do work better or do work differently in the data center industry? What are some of those things that really specifically have to start to come into play?
Yeah, so something you just said, Michelle, really sparks some thinking in my head. So you used the word tradition, and we use tradition in lots of different ways in the industry, and some of it's positive and some of it's really not. And some of the ways we use tradition are the positive ways are around repetition of excellence. So we do it the way we've always done it because it's foolproof and we're going to get it right and we're not going to touch it because we know it works. And from a process point of view, I can get on board with some of that thinking. Somebody who really likes change and kind of likes to turn the toy box upside down, I can get on board with, critical environment repetition equals success. I can. Where it becomes a problem is whenever you talk about people and tradition, particularly relating to women or other demographics, because you look at history and you look at tradition, and we haven't come out very well. So if you maintain tradition, the same people that haven't come out particularly well continue not to come out particularly well. Although I do agree that traditionally we did have a connection to the mission and the purpose of the industry, and we do benefit from the repetition in a critical environment, there's definitely a snap we need to make in terms of how we treat or how we think about people and our mindset, to your point, Michelle, around tradition when it comes to the approaches we take. So we're currently hiring for non-traditional skills. We don't know how to onboard somebody with no experience whatsoever, particularly successfully. We haven't really trained our traditional managers to deal with diverse workforces. So when you look at tradition in one sense, yep, tick, 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 great, critical environment, yes, engineering loves it, great. Anytime you're looking at the future or people, operationally or not, you cannot afford to think or approach the problems maybe too confrontational a word perhaps, but it is a problem. We don't have enough people, and the people we do manage to find often don't stay. And Joyce, to your question, finally going to get to answer your question. I'm sorry. One of the things I was thinking about in relation to how to break tradition is that our industry doesn't have to break every tradition in terms of itself. It can be impactful in other industries' traditions. So, for example, if my data center that I used to run, if we suddenly uh, meant that everybody could bring a child to work and place that child under school age into the creche that was run by the data center operator, I would have been laughed out of the building because there were no women on shift. So who's going to bring the children? And you just think, oh my God, this is the point. The point is that the male parents would have the opportunity to take their kids to daycare. They would have the opportunity to pick them up at the end of their shift and travel home with them. How lovely should that be? But the responses I got when I started talking about it were very amused people saying, but nobody would ever use it because we only employ men. So where are the children? Utterly, utterly fascinating response to something that could have looked at benefiting a different industry, because that woman who now doesn't need to deal with that childcare every day, that woman's day is now a completely different shape. She can do anything. She might have a really long nap, admittedly, but she could technically get another job anywhere, do anything, because she has that 12-hour period on the shift pattern where that child has gone to work with dad, has been dropped off and picked up safely and returned home. And it's that kind of thinking that I think our industry can inspire. We don't have to fix it for our own industry necessarily. So fixing that would help that family, but it wouldn't necessarily draw that person into our industry. It's not the point. The point is we have a non-traditional opportunity to drive new thinking and new opportunities for the people that we believe should have those opportunities. We don't have to be the direct recipient of that woman.
Well, I mean, yeah, because I mean, first of all, I love the idea of it's okay that getting people comfortable with the idea of breaking tradition, but it doesn't mean shattering all tradition. Like it's just like it. That's such a I'm like, oh, I'm so using that in the rest of my life. But but I mean, it really it's that's a really important point because what is, like, let's say there's the dad works in the data center industry, he has the opportunity to bring his child to the creche, and that's childcare sorted for that family, and then the mother gets to go and she does her thing in
Neuroscience.
biotech or something like that, and
Yeah,
gets and
clever.
gets to discover something, amazing that happens there. I mean, there is like that is where we're all so interconnected together, and I don't think we think about that as an industry as industries as well too.
I just want to add a really, really important point here. I feel that because I think the rhetoric can kind of swing sometimes. And when we talk about equity for women, the women aren't the only beneficiary to your exact point, right? But I work with a lot of leaders, right? I work with a lot of CEOs through my A Better Work business. And from time to time, we're doing coaching. We also run the Emerging Leaders for Digital Infrastructure Ireland. So I'm working with a lot of leaders. And one of the single biggest things that I see in older men, and I say older as in they're the same age as me now. I can't believe in saying that, older men. And they've kind of gone through their career and they're really struggling. And their one regret is that they missed so much of their kids growing up. And it always breaks my heart, right? And so it's not women who are just suffering here, it's men who are suffering. And then they may not realize it at the time, and maybe they do, but at a certain point, I've just heard it so many times that they've missed out on so much of it. And Catriona, what you're talking about, that could solve all of that. That, everyone can have the opportunities to spend the time with their family and in any of the relationships that they want to build. We should be like, work is incredible. I love work. I am, a recovering workaholic for sure. But there's so many more things outside work that we need to be enjoying. And guess what? When we're happy in work, and I'm not a happy clappy kind of, let's all be happy and hold hands and have fluffy bean bags. Like I am very much about when we are part of something good that we feel like, yeah, I achieved that. Like that was really enjoyable. I'm part of a great team. I love the people I'm working with. Like it's just good crack. It's good fun for anybody not in Ireland. That's fun. Crack equals fun. Um just just being careful.
Irish
Um
translations 101, courtesy of Critical Careers.
Yeah, I do. We really need this because that can be so badly misinterpreted. So we're like, of course it's fun. It is about when you leave the office and it feels like the day flew in. How are you going home? You're going home in a good mood. You feel like you've accomplished something. Your self-esteem's going up. Your confidence is going up. You're going home in a good mood. And everybody's going to feed off that good mood, right?
Yeah.
So it all feeds into each other. We don't just work and then go home and are a totally separate person. We aren't a separate person and then go into work. Yeah, we kind of have maybe a professional veil, but we're the same person inside, and one will melt into the other. And when we can create a better environment in our working
Yeah.
place for men or women, we're going to experience a much better outcome outside that as well.
On that point, there's a really interesting way of thinking around burnout in the critical environment, because burnout in the critical environment, because of the demographics of the industry, hits men proportionately harder than women because there are so many more men in the industry. So to your point, we're breaking men and we're sending them home to their families, and they're exhausted and burnt out and unhappy, and they're not connected to the mission and the purpose, and they're not feeling as you described feeling at work could feel. And we're, as an industry, we're partially responsible, if not fully responsible for that. And the interesting thing for me around what burnout more typically looks like in the critical environment is those people aren't necessarily calling in sick. They're still showing up because they understand they're a really important cog in a large wheel of infrastructure. They get that. And it's one of the few things that keeps them going occasionally, I think. But they show up, but that's it. That's all they do is they show up and they do their job and then they go home, and they go home without that smile and feeling of contribution, or that they've, powered the internet today, or, they were the reason that, those 82 operations in the local hospital were able to go ahead. They don't have that because they've become so used to in the UK in particular, those 12-hour repetitive shifts with no end in sight and little development and lots of overtime and all of the things that we know our talent shortage is causing. The large proportion of men in our industry, they're taking those home if they're on shift. And that in itself has a really deleterious effect on their family life and the chance of their son or daughter joining the industry. Part of that
For
we're
sure.
causing directly.
So then what I want to kind of, my next question kind of playing off of this, I wanted to kind of take it into two parts, but what then from a company perspective at a higher level, like what kind of things need to change in the workplace, like especially in that mission critical aspect of it, where so like I mean I think we've talked before about how does shift work needs to change and that kind of stuff. Like are there elements of that like that companies should be thinking about at the higher level?
For me, there's definitely a structure issue. So, to the best of my knowledge, mainland Europe doesn't do 12-hour shifts. They tend to do 8-hour shifts. And yet in the UK, we put our shifts traditionally, another great word, on 12-hour continental shift patterns. And that is I believe so that we have to use fewer people to run the shifts. So you ask them to do 50% more, which is just, if somebody said to me, okay, great, you've done your working day, you've done a decent job, you have to do 50% of it more every single day, there wouldn't be a lot left of me either. So the very basics of the way that we structure what's probably half the roles in the industry, there's no reason why we can't take a look at it. We might not choose, a bit like we were talking about tradition, we might not choose to change every bit of it, but there's no reason why we can't look at it and say, okay, so if we do need for the large mechanical or electrical engineering jobs, the PPMs, the CapEx work, the large projects, they might require longer shifts while those things happen. That doesn't mean that that should be the default for every single person that ever goes on shift in a UK data center. It doesn't have to be that way. It leads to burnout. We know it leads to burnout. That leads to attrition, or it leads to illness, or it leads to not as much getting done, frankly, because those people are shells of humans, which leads to more people needing to do more, which leads to the same over and over again. Then you're in that cycle. We know we have a pay issue in the industry where golden carrots get dangled and people move around for that extra money. Can't blame them. If somebody offers you more money for what feels like exactly the same job, I understand the attraction. And then we have a development issue. How many of our engineers or anybody on shift has got a really robust development plan that sees them move in the way you would expect to move in a corporate? I've always expected around 2 years to be what I would be doing in a role to prove my competency and be able to move up and onwards or sideways, whatever. But I expect that mobility. I can't think of that many people that I've encountered who have had a history of shift work that can show anything like that mobility in a business. It's just not, we don't carve it out to be as human as the non-shift roles.
Yeah. You just said that word, like human. I think that's the problem, right? We are all focused on EBITDA, profit, how do we get a return on earnings, return on investment? We've actually got to create human-centered designs. And I think companies are so big now that they have a responsibility to, look at how do we design this business from a human-centered way. And, you talk about we've got less people. There's more single points of failure now than ever before, right? Because we are kind of pushing more and more responsibility onto people. We're creating more reliance on, the likes of AI. And then we've got these new generations coming through where actually, according to, there was an Understanding America study, conscientiousness is in free fall, right? So in younger generations coming through, conscientious is in free fall. Neuroticism is on the rise. Agreeableness is in decline. So all the people pleasers are going away, and extroversion is in decline. So we've got generations of people coming through who just aren't going to fit that mold. And we're not really doing enough about it. I love two things. One is looking at change from an inclusive, and I don't mean inclusive as in different types of people, although I do, but I mean, like, let's all design it, right? The person at the top of an organization is not in the best position to design change because they're not experiencing the roles on a day-to-day, and they don't actually have the solutions. That's what usually happens. We all go in at the top of the business, we go into a room, we close the doors, and we come out with a new strategy and a new plan, and then we try and implement it and get buy-in. And 70% of the time, it doesn't work, right? Or, after 2 years, we're still not recouping the cost of the change. That to me is not a success. What we need to be doing is, how do we create solutions that are really going to work for the people who are involved? What about getting them all into a room? And we do this, we've seen it across company after company after company. We'll take people from around the business. Sometimes, even in large businesses, we will go around and get everybody into different workshops to input into, how do we do this? So we're looking at, in that example, guys, we want to change. We want to create a better environment for people to work in, where you're more engaged, where you're happier at work, where you're getting more out of it. How do we do it? And you bring the people in and you say, okay, we're working, based on these kind of continental shift patterns that have been here for the ages. How could we change it? And actually, why not leverage the incredible brain power in the organization to come up with the solutions that they know will work? They're serving the customer, they're understanding the technology, they're the ones with the solutions. We need to bring them into the room and ask them. And the second thing would be to make that change bite-sized, right? So experiments, create small experiments with timelines. Decide, okay, we're going to try this for 3 months. We're going to test it. We're going to see what's working, what's not working. We're going to retrospect it then and decide whether we go forward with it or not. You've got a far better chance of success by creating these kind of opportunities for micro experiments that will actually deliver the change that you need for an organization and for an industry at large. And then the third thing, I know I said there was 2, but there is 3. The third thing is to do this. This kind of blue sky thinking. How do we do this blue sky thinking? We've got to be completely disruptive, right? So in these inclusive sessions, we've got to allow people to be ridiculous in their suggestions, right? We're talking, and this is possible. I love, there's a book called It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. And I love it because it just is, you're reading it and you're going, this would never work. It's so disruptive. In this book, they talk about these crazy ways of working, right? Like, they're never allowed to put a calendar item in your diary without asking your express permission first. They talk about banks who do not and refuse to budget and are highly successful. They talk about these kind of really disruptive ways of working. And I think when we're looking at that, we've got to allow people to really think outside the box. And it doesn't mean that you'll follow through with these kind of crazy counterintuitive suggestions, but it does mean that you can really step out of the way we've done things around here for years and years and centuries as it happens. And we can actually really start rethinking how we can do things. And that kind of really disruptive mindset is how, if you've got a meeting schedule, we do a lot around meetings. If you've got a meeting schedule, you're doing 30 hours of meeting a week, you would have a complete meeting amnesty for 2 weeks and then only put back in the essential meetings. So it's that kind of mindset of, how do we completely disrupt the habits, the norms, the things that our brains are so used to. We literally have chemicals in our brains that reinforce these habits. So it's very hard to think outside. So we've got to be really disruptive in our thinking to actually come up with a solution that will potentially be really successful.
I think just to add to what you just said, Michelle, that our responsibility is to ask the right questions. So if we were to get every shift employee from another data center, and it was the industry statistic of 81% male, I think it is currently, and we were to ask them what would really, really help them, you would get a totally different answer if you were to ask what would really, really help you than if you ask what would really, really help your family. And I think it's up to us to make sure we're asking a non-traditional question. We're not trying to lead the answer, but we're trying to break tradition by asking them to think beyond the four walls of or the metaphorical walls of their workplace, to say, if there's something we could change that would make your whole life better, what would that look like? Because at the minute you limit your thinking by saying, what would make your day better? Oh, well, actually, my screwdriver's broken and I want more money. You're always going to get those answers unless you ask a different question.
One of the things that I have appreciated about each of you that you are doing, because this is, I mean, I've loved the conversation about what do we need to be thinking about at a corporate level? What do we need to be doing? What are non-traditional ways that we can bring about change and everything? But then there's also an individual thing that everybody can do as well. What are the things that like kind of to your point, Michelle, about, expanding and asking the entire organization what could work or what could be better. And I think both of you have different projects or different initiatives that you have kind of implemented that are taking that and trying to implement change on a smaller level, but actually having a big impact. So like Catriona, I know you've been doing this speaker series for about the last year or so. And it is, I love seeing the really smiley, happy faces of the photos that you take at the end of each session, because every single person in there, you can tell, has come away with something so impactful to them and so, I don't want to say life changing, but absolutely confidence building. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the speaker series and kind of why you started that and what kind of came about from that? And yeah, I think it's a good story for everyone to hear.
Ah, thanks. So it's the definition of a passion project, where you encounter something that you don't agree with or you think could be done differently. Ask a couple more questions. You go, oh, I can impact that. So what happened to set this up in the first place was I was attending industry events and they were fine. The first year I went, super interesting, attended loads of the talks, got loads out of it. Went the second year and discovered very similar, if not the same people saying very similar, if not the same things. And the industry moves faster than that. And in between those events, I'd been talking to lots of industry women. I think we alluded earlier to the fact that although not the largest network, women in the industry are very there for each other. It's particularly beautiful for that. So I'd met lots of women in the industry and had some really interesting conversations. And I was thinking, well, that's the wrong way around, isn't it? Why aren't you on stage? So I started overtly asking the women around me, why aren't you on stage? And I got two responses. I always got laughed at. And then I always got, well, I've never been asked. Well, so if you were asked, what would you say? Well, absolutely not. No, never. I'm not doing that. Why? Well, I've never done it. Well, okay. So if you had done it and you liked it and you got asked, would you then do it? Well, yeah, probably. Well, I can help with that. JLL has real estate, so it has offices. I have plenty of time and can't help myself when something like this presents itself. So I decided to talk 12 people in 12 of the industry's women, and my mentor, Angela Newby, talked those guys into a practice session. I was like, look, we're just going to do 3 panels. I'll give you the questions, 4 women per panel, and we'll do it in a closed room environment. So I've got an expert with me, Angela Newby, who's done loads of public speaking, and she's going to give you one-to-one feedback. Everybody in the room has a role. So there's no passengers in the room whatsoever. And then we work through 3 panels of 4 women, one of whom is the moderator. And the topics are deliberately vague, generic. They're development, mentoring, and networking. And there's 3 questions within each topic. The point of the session isn't to talk about the topic as much as it is to sit on an uncomfortably high stool, lose your breath, accidentally drop the F-bomb, you generally do all of the things that have stopped you doing it for the first time in front of 100 people. You do all of them in front of a group of women who only want you to succeed. Now, I don't take a picture at the beginning of those sessions, although I should start to, because those women do not look happy to be there. So I think I've done 9 or 10 of these now, and nobody's happy at the beginning. The most common comment is, I don't know what I'm doing here. I can't believe you've talked me into this. Is the most common. And I'm not joking, 2.5 hours later, you've seen the pictures, everybody's smiling. Most of the women in that room are 2 foot taller. They found space, they found their voice, and most of them find that they enjoyed hearing their voice. They enjoyed seeing other people's response to their voice. That is utterly joyful. And I hope I'm never going to run out of ability or space in my life to create those spaces for women. Because my goodness, they leave a completely different version of themselves in terms of their confidence and their wish to then go on to a panel to, speak their truth or talk about cooling or whatever floats their boat. But they then have that opportunity to do it. And the second thing I do is I take all of those women's details and I send them out to Europe's largest event organizers so that no event organizer can ever say again, I don't know who to ask. So I've got 100 women
I
ready.
had no idea you did that second part. I had no idea you did that
They
second
are
part.
allowed to
That's
say no.
amazing.
So the women that go on my sessions are allowed to say no, thank you. I've tried it and it's not for me. I don't want to go on your list. Everyone else goes on the list, and then I email. I think there's 6 of the largest event organizers in Europe, and that's who the list goes out to. And it goes out 2 to 3 times a year.
That's fantastic. And the thing, I mean, it's I love it. I love it on so many different levels, but I love it also because when I see you post about it and I see how many people say after men and women respond to your post saying, "Can we do that at our can you we
Yes.
host one here? Can you come do it at our organization?" And that is where something it's a
Yeah.
genuine grassroots effort that is taking place and just having an absolute phenomenal impact.
And it's just so joyful. And so I've been
Yeah.
doing it just over a year. I think the first one was maybe June last year, I think. It was after the first panel I've ever done. And that was one of the things that spurred me on. Like, nobody needs to go through what I went through, where your very first panel is in front of 150 people. That was not, I mean, it was fine, but it wasn't how I would have chosen to prepare for that. So, it definitely started off that. So it's been about a year. And the amount of impact it's had, you're right, you see it on LinkedIn, it's a really nice forum for other people to notice it. And I think I've delivered it at 3 or 4 places. So I went to Equinix and delivered it. I delivered it at Cundall, technically JLL's competitor. Don't care, sign me up. Vantage wants to do one. I did one at Digital Realty with Sue. The point is, women don't get the same opportunity. I guess, Michelle, so your earlier comment about network. Women don't have that same natural network. We don't form a network in the same way. And when there's fewer women that come up through an industry together, that network is naturally either smaller or weaker or both. And what this does is it hands you 11 other women in that room, plus an expert, plus me, who you feel like you've come through fire with those women. You started off terrified,
Yeah.
you've left
Yeah.
2 foot taller, you have a bond with them that you didn't have before. Every time I do one of these, more women meet more women. So I described to you the first session of those that I do. So I've done, I think, 9 of those now. And then in July, I did a season 2. Somebody named it season 1 and season 2, and it's really stuck. And season 2 came about because at the end of these sessions, these women who are now 2 foot taller would say to me frequently, can you do that again? But can you make that more difficult? To start with, I was
Yeah.
aghast. I was like, you didn't want to be here 2 hours ago. And now you want me to
Now
make it more
now you're
difficult.
asking me to make it harder for you.
I'm like, of course I will, but don't tell my boss. He doesn't need to know about any of this. So I managed to convince Louisa Buckley at Schneider Electric to co-host it with me. So we co-hosted season 2, which was cameras, mics, lights, uncomfortably high stools, audience, one-to-one interviews on camera after your panel. And the panels came up with the topics. So they were super relevant to those women and their industry. And we did it as if it was a full event. And it honestly was amazing. So we did 2 panels instead of 3. So 10 women got up and every other woman in the room got to learn with them. So they were brave enough to still have two experts. Angela did it for me again, and Dame Dawn Childs was the other expert. And those panelists were brave enough to take their one-to-one feedback in a full audience-filled room so that everybody in that room could learn from their experience with them. I don't think I stopped smiling for about 6 weeks. It was amazing.
Which is what you want, you wanna come off of everything feeling like you're smiling, which is phenomenal. So, Michelle, I mean, clearly you can hear Catriona's passion in her voice as she's talking about this, and it is just like I said, the first time she told me about it, I think my heart swelled 3 times, like, not that I'm the Grinch, but it felt like that, and, and I know that you've been doing this Emerging Leaders program with Digital Infrastructure Ireland, and I know that you have in many ways have kind of felt those same things, seen those same results. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, just, this whole idea of emerging leaders is when we look at women in the industry, where we start to see the greater divide amongst men and women is in early leadership. So it is in emerging leaders. So it is a huge part for us that we do have women properly represented there. And so we do aim to get at least 30% women on each of the courses. So emerging leaders is kind of like a 4-month program where people come in, they're kind of early leadership or, going into leadership, midterm leadership, that kind of thing. It's a lovely mix. It's like, 12 to 16 in the room. It's this 4-month program and it's very focused. First off, we've got this kind of strengths piece, right? So it's a huge part of like self-reflection. And if you think about our brains and how they're built, our brains are built and hardwired for survival, right? So they're not built for happiness and engagement and strengths focus and how we can develop. So we're looking for threats, we're looking for danger, we're analyzing what we did wrong, what we said wrong. We replay mistakes in our heads. That's what we're doing. And so to be strengths focused, we need, which is what we need in the modern workplace, to be creative, to be more human centered, to be focused on the engagement and helping people feel they matter and they're part of something greater. Is we've got to focus on strengths and we need to be intentional about training our brain to be focused on that. So there's a huge focus on that to start with. And then we go into lots of different ways of working. We look a lot at inclusive strategies. How do you do that? We look at how to build our own leadership brand. What kind of leader are we? And it's very much about authentic leadership. And I know that is just such an overused statement, right? But it is truly about, it's not the kind of leader that we aspire to be because we see somebody and we think they're great and we want to be them. It is very much about, what do you bring to the table? Why are
Yeah.
you the right person in who you are and what is innately natural to you? Why are you a brilliant leader? And how can you kind of leverage that and build the muscle and build your brain habits to use those strengths every day and use that in your leadership? Huge part of this then, again, and when we talk about women in leadership and women in the workforce, network is a massive challenge. And what we do differently in this program is that network is a huge part of this. So we learned the first one we kind of did hybrid. There was a bit online, there was a bit in person, and it was great. And there was some, really good relationships built. But we really, going back to that replay and overanalyze it, we analyzed that and we said, how can we get more out of this? Now we do it 6 days in person. There's a little bit of online around it. There's lots of learning around it. But these 6 days in person, where people are encouraged to stay overnight for the 2 full days, is completely mind-blowing in terms of the relationships, the connection, the support that they're developing. And now when people are leaving the program, they're leaving not just with the knowledge, the skills, their own, chests out and kind of, more ambitious and more confident, but they're also leaving with a support network that they will have for years to come.
I think too, what's interesting about that is, I've seen some of the survey results coming out of it. Like your numbers are off the charts of, it's like a 96 NPS score, like 100% say it boosts their confidence. I mean, you can tell me the numbers, but I know I've seen some of them and the numbers are unbelievable. So, you know, it's genuinely having an impact for those individuals.
Yeah, it is. And it's amazing. And, you know, I think what we bring in really early on, and I think it's because of those kind of, you know, more personal, reflective conversations, which people are really nervous about at the start. But there is a level of vulnerability early on so that people can actually start really rebuilding and reframing their thinking. Like, you know, look, we're really passionate about this. I want to change minds. I want people walking away going, that was life changing. And anything else is kind of doesn't feel good enough. So yeah, like we get great results. But it's like there's such a clear expectation set on people that it's up to you. I can come in. I can't teach you to be a leader. I can't teach you to be a better version of yourself. It is about what you do in the program yourself. And if you're willing, you're open, you're vulnerable, and you know, you put it in there, it is absolutely transformational. And the motivation and the confidence that's built, and it's just incredible. It's incredible to see people at the end. But they do it themselves. We just create the space for it.
No, yeah, exactly. But I mean, and I think that's what was like so interesting about, you know, both of these, the speaker series and this. It is what people put into it. But you guys are giving them that opportunity to push themselves out of their comfort zone, to be vulnerable in a way that they might not be vulnerable otherwise. And it really gives them, you know, and you're both seeing the way that people are thriving in those environments. And that's what's so exciting to me. And that's where it gives me hope that we're going to be able to do more in the workplace. And, you know, as much as the women in the book told me how happy and welcome they feel here, it makes me feel like there's still so much more we can do, and there's still so many creative ideas out there, and there's just so many different ways that we can take this forward. And like, that's exciting. I mean, it's an exciting industry anyways. Like, this is an industry that is fundamentally changing so much, and it's really exciting to see people who are trying to fundamentally do things differently within it to make it even a better fit or more comfortable or more welcoming for the people who are here. So with that, I have a feeling we could sit and talk about this for hours on end. So, but I am mindful that, you know, I don't want to take too much of either one of your time, but I really appreciate you both being here, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Joyce.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Critical Careers. A special thank you to our sponsor, CBRE, for their support in helping us share the stories of the people shaping the future of digital infrastructure. To learn more about CBRE, visit www.cbre.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like, share, and follow the podcast. Thanks for listening.